do you have any role in trying to influence Catholic theology and trying to change it in ways that might be more consistent with what were your intuitive beliefs about morality before you
So I don't think the fact that I have a blog makes me a theologian, right? I have, like, the fact that I blog about math doesn't make me a mathematician, and I wouldn't unless I put more work into it than I currently do.
Yeah, but you haven't surrendered your capacity to figure out your own morality.
And I haven't surrendered, like, my ability to, like, read math textbooks either, right?
Yeah.
But, like, I don't really think of myself as a voice that leads in areas that I'm not a specialist on. So actually, like, the thing where I'd be more likely to do a lot of chatting would be on, and I've done, I'm not doctorate level, but I've done more reading on just war theory and on war ethics. And if I were going to, like, pop up and go, well, let's, like, talk more about this, I'd talk on that. But I'm not ever going to, first of all, be a specialist in all parts of Catholic ethics or theology. And that's not one of them. Like, the fact that I have a voice doesn't mean I am a voice on, like, large-scale issues any more than I am on history or math or anything else. And I haven't surrendered my reason on, what's the provenance of, this document from the Carter administration, and how did it impact decision-making. I just don't know much about it. And unless I actually do the work, I shouldn't comment on it. People have to put in the legwork.
Yeah, but the legwork that you have put in is your output up to your moment of deciding that you believe in Catholicism. That you have a bank of analysis of morality from the basis of your intellectual process.
I have a bank on metaphysics, and I have a bank on things that, like, I've personally thought about. Which, first of all, like, it would be one thing if, like, the path I had traced out seemed to be, like, the only path that took anyone towards truth, which certainly is not the case. And if it were, then, like, I'd be superfluous because everyone would have been over it already. So I think, I have something useful to say to Neoplatonists who are trying to figure out what to do with themselves. But I don't think I have, like, a useful message for all, I have a useful message for all people, and it's that, like, mathematics is very interesting, like, Alistair McIntyre is cool, and Stephen Sondheim is an excellent composer. And that's, like, my universal message. And a lot of the other stuff I know is, like, particularized to contexts or beliefs that are not shared by all people. Like, I've had arguments with friends who are Catholic, who didn't really start from the Neoplatonist position and aren't interested in that background. I've had arguments with friends who are atheists who think Neoplatonism is bunk, and I started near Neoplatonism, so I don't have a good story of how do you get to Neoplatonism. Like, it's almost like handing someone off down a trip where, like, each person gives you the next stage of the directions. I'm, like, decent at the Neoplatonism to Catholicism bit, but I don't know all the other paths up the mountain, and I don't know all other things that are interesting.
Have you ever gone through the exercise of going through your previous blog posts from your atheist phase, in retrospect, and testing what you were saying, what you were saying then against your Catholicism, as opposed to just testing your memories of what you think?
So I've done that a bit just because I had to re-tag a bunch of posts after there was, like, an import horrible internet annoying thing. I can tell you what the biggest shift was, but it's less exciting than a hot button political issue. I used to talk about everything much more in terms of duty, in sort of Kantian duty, where you find the right thing to do and take as little pleasure in it as possible because pleasure is corrupting. And I don't do that anymore.
Okay. I thought you said you were virtue ethicist. I
used to be a Kantian. Virtue ethicist was, like, a big step forward. My Kantianism was really, like, I don't want to also strawman Kant.
Yeah.
I think Kant was not trying to put forward something as awful as what I was doing.
Okay.
But, like, my Kantianism was very much like, take no joy in doing good things, do them purely out of duty, like, doing nice things for friends, like, you should do it, but, like, beware of it because it's corrupting, because they'll be nice to you in return because you're your friends, and that's bad. This is, like, sophomore level philosophy, right? That, immature, kind of silly, but that's the biggest shift I've made. And, that's the person I am, that was an enormous error that I needed to correct. And unlike questions of, all theology about the priesthood, it makes an enormous difference in my day-to-day life, so I'm happy I put a lot of my time there. There are other people who are working on the other problems that I work on, the ones that are either most urgent for me right now, maybe most urgent for the world if I have a particular talent for them.
Yeah, you see, what I think is a shame is, obviously in one sense it doesn't bother me what happens within the Catholic Church, but if you do have somebody like yourself who does have that sort of independent intellectual voice in coming into it, and also particularly given that you're a woman and the Catholic Church hasn't got a great tradition of listening to women.
Well, it has a number of women who are doctors of the church who have been recognized for their enormous contributions to theology. One thing that does happen is that people talk about priesthood and like hierarchical elevated positions as the main, sign that you have influence in the church or the church is listening. But, Catherine of Siena is someone who had an enormous enormous weight on how the church developed theology. And the fact that she was a woman, didn't stop her. The church certainly has, a bad history at some points on women, as do all long-running institutions through time, because history has been a long period of not treating women well.
And do you, as a woman who is a Catholic, feel that you have a contribution to try to change that?
To try and change, institutional sexism in the world?
No, within the Catholic Church.
I mean, I think I would more if I were on my parish council or something, where I might go, how are we structuring events, I think the thing about institutional sexism is, large parts of it are boring to fight. Important, but boring. Things like paternity leave, things like healthcare benefits, things like what pronouns are you using? If you constantly give your homily and whenever you use a pronoun, even for a generic imaginary person, you use the word he, let's say.
Yeah.
It just doesn't sound as good. So are you thinking as much about examples drawn from other people's lives? I don't actually know a priest who does that, but it comes to mind. It's a good example of institutional sexism that's small, that's not theological, but important. But I don't actually get involved at all in running my parish. I'm 24, I move around a lot. I've lived, felt 4 places in the last 2 years. So, I'll worry more about, in my parish, are there specific things I should do when I have a parish for more than 4 months? I really do think, though, if you're trying to say, first of all, is there a problem in my local community and what should I do about it? You have to be rooted in your local community. And one reason I don't know whether I know any priests who kind of use only male pronouns when telling stories is I just don't see any priests every single week to notice a pattern. So again, it's about the legwork. If you want to have a voice in the community, you need to be part of the community, do the spear carrying, live in it enough to know what the problems are. And I know people who do those kinds of things both in the church and out, and they're actually rooted in the community in a way that I'm not. And to just say that I have a voice, I'm going to speak before it's informed, is unhelpful. It would actually, also mute and discredit people who actually put in the legwork, who perhaps are the people, I want to hear speaking. If I speak and just go, let's all think about how we run parish meetings that I don't attend, I'm delegitimizing the voice of the people who actually attend them and have informed opinions to contribute. If I say, well, let's consider the theology of how the church should interact with no-fault divorce laws without either reading up on law or theology, the next person who comes along to comment, you would and should take less seriously because someone just let me comment while being uninformed on both spokes of the important part of the issue. I have no patience for people who do this when, this is the most annoying thing about science reporting, right? Where studies say and then some ridiculous thing that could only be written by someone who didn't read the study, only read the press release. There are a lot of subjects on which I've only read the press release, and if it makes me furious when people do it in my discipline, I'm not going to wander into all other disciplines, even if they're kind of shiny and exciting disciplines, and do it there. It's not just rude, though it is. It's unhelpful. There are people who put in the legwork on each of these issues, and I've only done it really on war theory. So,
what do you think? Well, given that one of your areas of that you have done a lot of legwork is atheism, obviously. As a Catholic, what do you think are the biggest mistaken beliefs that atheists have?
Well, first I would say that atheism is such an umbrella term that's closer to saying what are the major mistaken beliefs that Christians have or religious people have, where I would single out different things in different groups. I'd say the largest thing, which obviously doesn't apply to everyone, is just more of a reluctance to be wrong than a reluctance to try out different ideas or give them a go, which isn't unique to atheists. Lots of people have this, but where it's almost the solipsism thing, where if you want to take a flensing knife to your philosophy and make sure you cut out everything that might be contradictory, instead of kind of checking to make sure or spending some time figuring out if you can harmonize the problem, you end up with very small ideas sometimes, where I'd have this problem where you just start having an argument with someone, not with everyone that I've argued, but I've had the argument sometimes where I'm saying, the person's well, religion is horrible, look at the Taliban, look at what it does to women, and you start going down the argument and go, well, why should women be treated differently? Well, all people deserve to be treated well. But I'm like, well, how do you define what well? Maybe they think this is well, and they have a different understanding. And going down that same like subjective thing, the person goes, and like, why is your claim more legitimate than their claim about what good treatment for women looks like? And then I have people who go, oh, they bite the bullet and go, I guess it's not. I guess I have no more legitimate claim to say how women should be treated than the Taliban. And I know very few people who jump that far, right? But it's kind of the keep backing off making strong claims you can't prove or state with certainty, and more charity for things you say, well, this is my best understanding of the world, and here's why I have it. I'm open to changing it. And I think there are a lot of atheists who do that very well. Luke Muehlhauser, who used to run Common Sense Atheism, does a very nice job with that. But and our language doesn't help people on that, in that we tend to ask people, what do you believe and what are you certain of, which are binary questions, not what's your current understanding of the world, which is open. What are you most confident in of those things, least confident, how sure are you? Which invite people to make gradations and make it easier to say, I do think I have a stronger claim on how women should be treated than the Taliban. And I'm not exactly sure what I have to back that up, but I'm not going to throw out all my assumptions about that just because we're in the middle of an argument right now. And because I came up short in this second. You might say, let's put a pin in that and come back to it. I notice I don't have a really good answer for you now. But I feel so strongly about it that I want to come back and reinvestigate rather than cede the point. And sometimes I end up in fights with people who do that. And I think the internet exacerbates this also, because on the internet, which is where a lot of religious argument, a lot of religious discussion happens off the internet. A lot of religious argument happens on the internet, where either people don't want to concede anything ever, or it's impossible to say, let's come back to this later because it's a comment thread. You're not going to come back to it in 2 days. So no one does say, that is a tension in my beliefs, let's have coffee and talk about it, which is really the right approach, rather than, no, I believe the thing that's consistent, regardless of where it leads me. And there's also, a little bit of what my friends would have called in college, a cult of badassery around that, where you're I love the truth so much that I'll believe whatever it leads me to, no matter whether it makes sense, like the, Taliban thing, because I'm not afraid to, believe horrible things. And it's worth saying, I do think they're horrible things. There must have been something that informed my belief that they're horrible. That's probably a kind of evidence that I should look into before just recommitting.
And in your experience, have you found atheists or Christians to be more reluctant to accept that they might be mistaken?
I mean, this is really, first of all, sampling error, in that most of the Christians I knew were in and have come out of this debate group that is super aggressive about changing your mind and that being a virtue. So I know a huge number of Christians who are like that. I think, most people generally are not like that. But I really, I can generalize about all people I haven't met or spoken to, but I'm not very good at it, and I'm not going to be accurate. I think... of
the atheists that you do know.
Mm-hmm. So most of my friends, I'm such a parochial person, most of my friends are all college friends or people I've met through these people who just love arguing, so they're both in this category. I just don't have people in my life for very long who don't enjoy arguing with the possibility that someone might be wrong. The friends I have who are both atheist and religious are the kinds of people who are I love them, but who are the kinds of people who say, let's have a fight and figure out which one of us, if not both, are wrong right now. Yeah. Which I love.
Yeah, because one of the things that I found impressive about your blogging and stuff is that when you were an atheist, you were approaching it on the basis of where might I be mistaken, and pushing things as far as you can in terms of trying to analyse it. And so what I suppose I'm wondering is are you doing the same thing now that you're a Catholic? Are you going to be examining Catholicism from the perspective of where might this be wrong, or are you going to be following it on the basis of, well, now I believe it's right?
So I think there's a mix of both, in that some of the things I was doing when I was an atheist were still just, what is the ethically right thing to do here? And I wasn't going back all the steps to say, is deontology true? Is virtue ethics true? Lots of the time on my blog, including while I was an atheist and became a virtue ethics, it wasn't let's go back and re-examine virtue ethics every day. I didn't have something new to say about it every day. I hadn't learned a new thing. It was, how should I live virtue ethics? That's a lot of what the exploration was, and what does it imply that I'm living virtue ethics? So in the same way that there are some posts on my blog that are here's a part about Catholicism that confuses me, and there are some parts that go, now I'm living Catholicism instead of virtue ethics, but not very well. And the bit that's how am I wrong is how am I doing it, which was the same thing before of how am I doing virtue ethics? Is my model of virtue ethics correct? Is my understanding good? On forth from there.
Okay. Are there any issues that you'd just like to raise, or any questions that you have?
For me,
yeah.
I'm actually curious, and what America has steeped in religion rhetorically, but so pluralistic that everyone kind of has this lip service, like religion is very cool, but doesn't have much shared culture across anything. I'd be curious, is there anything that... I almost mean, like, do you think there's a unique, interesting thing that happens for atheists in America that doesn't for atheists in Ireland, or a unique, interesting thing that happens for atheists in Ireland that doesn't for atheists in America, if, as I would guess, there's, like, more shared cultural knowledge about religion in Ireland than there is in America?
Well, there seems to be a lot of research done, particularly there's a group called the World Values Survey, which is a team of interdisciplinary social scientists around the world who for the last 20-25 years have been studying human values around the world. And what they're finding is that when individuals move from survival values towards self-expression values, and that's triggered by things like investment in health and education and communications technology and moves towards democracy, that enough individuals making that transition moves societies from traditional religious values towards secular rational values. And that seems to be happening around the world in various places. Now, it happens in different ways in different countries, and in typically in Western Europe, and where actually ironically where traditionally the Protestant Western Europe countries, it's that process is most advanced, where you'd have more people having moved towards self-expression values and societies moving towards secular rational values. America is kind of an outlier on the. If you take from a broader perspective, say if you take the world in terms, I think
America likes to think it's an outlier in all possible ways.
It is, but it's a slightly different outlier than it thinks it is. It looks like an outlier, but actually it isn't. What you need to do in America is divide it down and compare the Bible Belt states with some of the maybe more fundamentalist global South religious states, and compare some of the more sort of Western liberal states with the sort of Western democracies and so on, and it becomes less of an outlier on that basis. But I think it depends on where you are in America. I was over a couple of months ago in North Carolina at a conference on atheism, and I found that, like, the one thing that I did find when I was going around just buying stuff in shops and restaurants and so on outside of the conference, and people would pick up the accent and ask, where are you from, and they'd say, what are you doing? And I made a point of saying, I'm speaking at an atheist conference, and there was a sort of a look that I don't get if I'm talking to somebody in Boston or if I'm talking to somebody in San Diego, so it's I think the thing.
In some parts of the South, you can get the same look if you say you're Catholic.
Yeah, well, I picked the ones that you get it if you say you're atheist. Yeah, so I think America you have to look at as almost as a continent rather than a country.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the other question I'm kind of curious about is that a number of atheist bloggers that I quite like have been doing a lot on kind of atheism plus the idea that well, sometimes the way they play is like, since we're already winning, like, let's think about what the victory will look like. They don't put it that way. I put it that way because I like all things more pugilistic. But, saying that, instead of just arguing against religion, what is the positive vision of the world that's going to be put forward? And the thing that's happened, of course, is it usually happens that then people argue about the positive vision of the world. It turns out everyone doesn't agree with each other because you are united under one idea rather than a bunch of different ones. So you could have people who are kind of like hardcore utilitarians, or people who think that, like, just human happiness is important. No, you have to be happy in particular ways, etc. Is that something that you spend a lot of time thinking about? Would you like to see atheism kind of start uniting under a banner of something that's more than just a rebuke to religion? Or
I don't think it'll ever unite.
Well, if everyone's interested in seeking truth, eventually it will. Yeah.
But well, whether they seek it or whether they'll find it is a different thing.
As long as it's out there, you have to stumble across it eventually.
I think that it's I don't believe that atheism is merely a disbelief in God and nothing else. I think that in the same way as theism is as much an assertion about morality as it is about reality, that atheism is also an assertion about morality.
What assertion is that?
The assertion is that morality is natural and not supernatural. Now, however you break that down, or whatever your
But
your
what
claim
is
comes from.
the thing that is natural? If I were, a chair is natural but not supernatural, I actually know what a chair is versus tables. Like, what does morality look
Our
like?
ideas of how we should live together, our ideas as social animals as to how we should live together, rather than merely consider our own individual well-being.
With some of those ideas being right and some of them being wrong, or just
Ultimately,
ideas?
I think some of the ideas are objectively correct. It's objectively correct that randomly torturing people is bad.
I hope we all managed to connect on that one.
Yeah, but that's all you need to accept in terms of that. But as we were talking earlier, whether you're religious or non-religious, and whether actually there's something else I wanted to ask you about now. That's just.
Oh wait, I have a follow-up for yours too.
Right, okay.
I've gotten fewer follow-ups.
Okay, remind me to ask you about the Euthyphro. Okay. No, okay, you asked me your follow-up first.
Alright, so then I'm curious if you're saying morality is natural, not supernatural, but also objective, that we have subjective perceptions of.
Yes.
Where in the natural world is it? Like, when you say it's natural...
It's a property of our brains.
It's a property of our brains. So if we changed our brains so that we were made happy by other things, would morality change along with it? So what if, we both enjoyed torturing people and we made a subset of people who enjoyed being tortured?
Well, what I do, I personally categorise it into, this isn't following any particular philosophical school.
It'll be your philosophy when you get named after you.
Yeah, I can get it named after me. I can be, in terms of the morality as a person, you're the only person on the internet.
Leahism.
Leahism, yeah. So, I think the important distinction, or an important distinction, is between good and bad outcomes and between good and bad people / intentions. So I think they're very different things. You can have people with good intentions doing things that they think are good things, but they're actually doing bad things. They're just mistaken.
But it still sounds like you're referring to a rule book of good and bad things that are still determined by something else, whether it's like maximizing pleasure, maximizing contentness, maximizing arete virtue, like. That's the framework above what morality actually is. It's doing the things that are in the good list. But what is the good list?
Well, I don't know. Nobody can define it.
But you have a subjective perception.
Exactly, yeah. And it is a subjective perception.
A subjective perception that's better than some people's subjective perception.
I think so, yeah.
I expect so, because I know what some people's are. Yeah,
but also and worse than others. It's very unlikely that either of us are the best person in the world. Given that there are 7 billion. So, but no, what I would think is it's. I mean, to oversimplify it, and I'm going to. I'll quote Sam Harris's explanation, even though I know that it sort of implies a whole lot of other things that I don't necessarily bring in. But I would accept Sam Harris's starting point that the worst possible world is a world in which every conscious being is suffering to the maximal extent all of the time.
Yeah.
I would accept that as objectively true, and I think it's very difficult. If whatever you see the thing about morality, it's not necessarily that morality is a thing when I say that it's objective. What I'm saying is that there are objective truths about whatever it is that people are pointing to when they use the word
We don't know
morality.
where morality is, but we know where it's not. It's not in the pit of everyone being tortured all the time, but it might be like this peak because of landscape he's doing the thing. Yeah. It might be the world where we're all married to each other. It might be the world where all of us are mathematicians. It might be the world where, I am a mathematician and all of you do whatever you want.
Yeah, so you're
most certain about the nadir rather than
there are things that are objectively good and objectively bad, and all you can probably all that we can probably agree on is the extremes of that. Things that are quite clearly good and quite clearly bad, and the reason for us not being able to, other than subjectively interpret the rest of it, is because there's so many interrelated causes and effects that you can't figure out what it is. But there's a key point.
That position that the nadir is what we're most certain of. You take kind of a very different approach to the world, where you're just kind of focusing on keeping us away from that region, which arguably we're like mostly away right now, and then kind of look at pockets and go, that pocket of people all seem to be living a very horrible life, so let's like get them out of the pocket. Yeah. And then we'll leave them be, right? And then people take much more prescriptive things where they go, well, people aren't being actively tortured, but their lives are too stressful, or poverty is a pain, a pain that burdens your life. even if it's not being horribly tortured, so we should change something here. And someone's like, oh no, dignity of work is really important. So once you get out of the obviously bad, do you kind of step back and say epistemological modesty?
Well, I don't know. I know I've always been involved in social activism. I've been involved in campaigns against terrorism in Northern Ireland. I've been involved in campaigns for pluralism and campaigns.
But pluralism seems like it's really it's.
Oh, I tell you, you live in Ireland, you'll find out how significant pluralism is. If you live in a country like Ireland, which for years was effectively controlled by the Roman Catholic Church, and in a way that if you didn't adhere to the philosophy of the Roman Catholic Church, you were and still are discriminated against. We still have laws in Ireland that explicitly exempt the Catholic Church, well, all churches, but most influentially the Catholic Church, from equality laws that allows them to run state-funded 90% of the primary schools in the country, that allows us to do it with an integrated curriculum that parents can't opt their children out of, and are essentially being indoctrinated in a religion that they don't believe in. So if you grow up in that type of Ireland, and Ireland where... But I just want to finish this point just because I really don't think most people realise where Ireland was up until very recently. Until very recently, divorce was unconstitutional, contraceptions were illegal, homosexuality was illegal, not gay marriage was illegal, being gay was illegal. Up as recently as the 1990s, the Virgin Megastore in Dublin was fined in court for selling a condom. So so in that context, if you take the moral landscape, pluralism is pretty high in the localised context of Ireland.
Well, pretty high relative to the depth of horrible torture, but it's less clear. The main thing is that people have a lot of different paths out of the depths of possible torture.
Yeah.
And although it's useful to just say, well, I'll help everyone who's moving us out of the pit.
Yeah.
After a certain point, either you just stop choosing or favouring paths, or you start discussing which of those paths look more plausible than others.
Yeah. But I think the point, if we're still using the analogy that Sam Harris introduced, I don't think his point particularly is the nuances of the roots out of it. It was an analogy that enabled the principle to be established that you can have objective truths about morality without them being prescribed by gods. Which, by the way, brings back to Euthyphro.
Yes, I don't think he actually established that. He establishes there's a truth we all probably agree on, which is that some things are bad, and then doesn't explain how we come to know they're bad, what makes them bad. He just says, yes, most of us think that these are bad and worse than others. He doesn't actually ground it in natural anything. It's more a rebuke to people who say that morality is a meaningless thing to talk about than that it's a supernatural thing to talk about. And I'm quite glad to have him sticking it to the nihilists, but I don't think just saying we all agree that people being horribly tortured forever actually negates the idea that might be true because there's a God who made us in a particular way, and made us in a way that means that we're degraded and hurt by torture. That the thing that makes us beautiful in his sight is hurt by that, both in the committing of it and in the suffering of it, and that's what makes it wrong.
Can I ask you about the Euthyphro
or is it good because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it's good?
Yeah.
So the thing about...
the context being that if we accept, or for the purpose of this discussion, accept the existence of objective morality, how do you make the jump from it being coming from a god, or in your perspective, it being the god?
Yeah, so the thing about, so it being the god does collapse the Euthyphro dilemma mostly. No one made the case in Plato's time that Zeus and Hera and that whole passel of squabbly people were the ground of goodness, were the source from which it sprang. They didn't look like it, certainly, but they weren't making the metaphysical argument that this is what goodness has its root in. Versus Aquinas does. He does say that God is, actually both, loves the good, wills the good, but is the good also. So,
but can you justify that?
Well, that's an assertion. It's not. You're asking, can I justify that claim about God?
In terms of the Euthyphro dilemma, which side of the Euthyphro dilemma do you?
So that's the thing about saying that God is both the good and wills the good. It just dissolves the dilemma. It does.
Yeah, but it dissolves to the extent that you can you say it, but it doesn't actually.
So, and it's rooted in a long history of how people have understood the Christian God, through theology. Christianity wasn't designed as an answer to Euthyphro. It happens to answer the Euthyphro. So it's a less, like there are other objections to race Christianity that are more relevant. The objection that Euthyphro raised in his pantheon is less relevant to Christianity because of like the ways it actually interacts with Neoplatonism.
Well, there's a danger of turning into a lengthy discussion. So now it's well let's leave that one then, because there's a lot that could be said about the evolution of how Christianity selectively took bits from Neoplatonism.
If we could talk about every single thing that was interesting about Christianity in this one time period, that would be a miracle, and you should be converted by that. I think we could agree there would be nothing natural in covering all interesting disputes about Christianity in one interview.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. But we might be able to do it supernaturally.
Yep, and then you'd have to concede. So
yeah, which means that if we can't do it, the probability is you'll have to concede. It
means you can't do it. It moves in your direction, but it depends on how large our prior was on
I'll take that.
That being the miracle conflict today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, you too, yeah. Really
Thank you so much.